City County Committee meeting. Really excited about being here, really excited about this conversation. So thank you all for being here. We have a fairly light agenda today. I'm not mad at that. So we'll get started. As we get started and as we start, I'm sure other city council members will be coming in, I believe. We don't really require quorum, so, well, not to start anyway. So to move things, we will. So, Mayor Pro Temp, did you have any words?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good morning, everyone. Nothing formal except to say congratulations to our new colleagues here at County. On behalf of His Honor the Mayor and my colleagues, some of whom are here now, City Councilmember Riss, thank you for continuing this really substantive and important conversation. We look forward to building on the progress that we've made with these type of conversations in the past and whatever areas they may be, whether it's housing or cooperation on crime prevention and just the well-being of our residents and citizens. We're excited about the new chapter being forged here and written here in this building and in this chamber, and we're just honored to be with you. So congratulations, Mr. Vice Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. All right, so we'll start with the approval of the, well, let's see, do we have? No, maybe not yet. We don't have quorum. All right. We have these approval things going on. So let's go ahead. We'll skip the approval items until we do have quorum, and then we'll come back to those in a little bit. Is that okay with everyone? Yeah? Good. All right, so the first discussion item is number 3, which is the discussion to replace the joint city-county meetings with City Board of Education meetings. Who will be taking it? Oh, okay. Wendy?
Well, I don't know. I think this has been discussed at the leadership level, but I would say, just in my response to this, is that I would suggest that we consider maybe 2 of our meetings being all of the bodies together, because we as a board already meet regularly with the Board of Education. And I also think that we all go to a lot of meetings, but that there are things that we discussed that it's not necessarily relevant for the Board of Education, but there are some things that I think this is triggered by the discussion at our August joint meeting, the presentation from Matthew Palmer about forming a task force or an ad hoc committee looking at infrastructure, and the importance for the city, county, and schools to work together on planning around that. But I don't necessarily think that all of our meetings should be joint. I would suggest looking at the calendar and seeing if we could pick like 2 a year that are joint, because I do think it's important that we do have just the city and the county on certain things that we do work on that the Board of Education doesn't need to focus on. So that was going to be my suggestion around this item.
During my time on the school board, the meetings simply that were just between the county and the Board of Education were extremely important and productive. And I'm not sure that I would agree to replace all of the meetings like you were saying, Wendy. I think those meetings, however frequent or infrequent, were really important in the relationship building between the county and the schools. So although I think it's beneficial to have all 3 bodies periodically, I do think we need to consider the continuation of just the county and the schools, in particular in meetings as well. I don't want to add meetings.
Right.
We can adjust a few of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And even just looking at our proposed meeting schedule, we have 6 meetings with our two bodies, and maybe looking at two of those dates where we could have a joint one with the schools. That would be my suggestion, maybe especially related to the budget. You know, so I don't know what folks think about, you know, maybe the February meeting being a joint one, and the August meeting. I also think that it is going to be important for us the three different elected bodies, to coordinate in the coming 4 years, because there are, I think, going to be, unfortunately, a lot of issues that impact us at the local level that are impacting our residents. And so coordination with all three of us to address those impacts and the needs in our community, I think, are going to be very important.
Others? Other thoughts?
If I might, Mr. Chair, to Chair Jacobs' point, we did indeed discuss this at the leadership meeting. I think the superintendent and board member Burton and Commissioner Alam were primarily leading the conversation. I think it's more talking, I think, is better. It doesn't necessarily have to be with more meetings. The more we coordinate amongst these boards, I think it's beneficial. I'm certainly not going to quarrel with the underlying proposition that we should talk. There are definitely areas where there's some where it's areas that are good candidates for joint coordination, whether it's from the city's point of view, transportation, safety. So definitely, and I think I resonate with the idea that maybe using some of the meetings that we already have, piggybacking on a couple of them. I don't think that creating another meeting is necessary, to your point, Mr. Vice Chair. So, from the city's point of view, we think the more we talk across the three elected bodies, the better. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Apologies for being late. I have two requests. One came up last year. If we can move these to 9:30. High schools don't start in Durham County until 9:15. So for anyone, that's the last round of kids that have to be in buildings. So if we're going to actually be pro-family, we need to start our meetings when families can actually get to meetings. One other thing is, with the meeting schedule, I don't want additional meetings. I think part of the reason that this works is that these are formal spaces where the public can actually see the interactions between our three governing boards. City Council, while has very little oversight over our public schools, often gets emails from residents about school issues. It happens on the regular. And so I think that, I've said this many times, residents don't necessarily know which governing body is responsible for what. They just want to see action and responsive government, and that's our jobs to do. So however it moves forward, I do think incorporating the schools into these meetings, since they're already on the calendars, people have already made space for them, staff from both the city and the county are already here, is probably the most efficient thing we can do. Whether they come every time I understand that with the county and the schools, especially around budget issues, there's things there that don't really pertain to the city. But when I think about transportation, infrastructure, and other things, it does. And so we need to have those conversations more regularly and in good faith for our residents. Thank you.
I absolutely support the premise of 9:30. I couldn't take my kids to school today just because of this, and luckily my wife was able to do that. I usually take them to school. All right, so do we have quorum yet? We do? Okay. All right.
I make quorum.
Okay. All right, very good. So the action, well, that was just discussion there. I think we'd have to get a proposal from the staff and have action at a later date about if we're going to change some of these meetings to the 3 governing bodies instead of just 2. I would imagine that would come the next time we meet. We could vote on that. We could vote on that. So I'm going to go back to the first two items on our agenda that require approval. Now that we have quorum, we have approval of the minutes, June 11th, 2024, and August 13th, 2024. Those minutes were included in the agenda that was sent out earlier. Entertain a motion.
Move to approve.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded that we approve the previously stated minutes. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, please use the same sign. Passes unanimously. The next item for approval was the approval of the 2025 Joint City-County Meeting Calendar. We kind of talked about that in this previous discussion, right? That this kind of showed up in our discussion about the school, including the schools. Should we hold off on that if we're considering changing some of the meetings, or should we just go ahead and schedule them? Go ahead, Wendy.
Well, I made the proposal that we do invite the schools to the February 11th meeting and the August 12th meeting, and to Councilmember Caballero's point that those would be opportunities to focus discussion on the issues that are of joint significance, such as transportation, the infrastructure issue, anything else that we know is a joint, specifically a joint issue, that we use those meeting dates to focus on those issues. So that I'm just making that proposal so that we can move forward with that and have them at the next meeting, because if we wait,
Okay.
we'll miss out on that opportunity. It's also before the budget, and in case there are anything that comes up that has budget implications for either the city or the county or the schools.
Okay.
I think the clerk has,
If I can add, we already have approved on the calendar the joint county and Board of Education meeting on August the 12th. So because it would have been a conflict anyway, we would have had to change that date. If
Okay.
it would have just remained city-county, we can include the schools on that meeting since it's already approved on the county's calendar.
oh, awesome, we can get rid of a meeting?
Well, it'll be a joint, it'll be
Right,
all
but-
three instead of
Yeah.
yes.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
But it means one less meeting.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, for us. It's one less for us. Michelle.
Yeah, I just want to make sure, we change it to 9:30 to make sure,
Yeah.
everyone can be here, can take their kids to school.
Okay. Just want to check with the attorneys that it's okay that we make this adjustment in this approval of the calendar. Okay. Okay. All right. Very good. So, I'm sorry, Councilwoman Caballero.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Lee, just very quickly, could we just have I appreciate Commissioner Jacobs' point about maybe not every Monday meeting, but can we have the understanding that if we only meet every other month. So if there are things between February and August, which I think might be likely, that there's opportunity to have all three. Does that make, without having an additional meeting? Does that make sense? Okay, thank you.
I'm not really sure how to move that. I think that's something we can get together and then notice a
I think
meeting.
at the February meeting, if it's clear that there are
Yeah.
things that we need to all address in April, that then we can
Oh,
say
yeah.
that in February.
Okay. Yeah, I think we can do that. Okay. So I'm going to state what I think the motion should be to make sure that we clear it up here. So we're going to approve the 2025 Joint City-County Meeting Calendar, adding that the February 11th and August 12th meeting will include the school system, and the meetings will start, moving forward throughout the calendar. The meeting will start at 9:30. Did I miss anything? Anyone? No? Okay, I'll accept the motion for that.
Move to stated.
It's been moved and properly seconded. The stated motion. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, please use the same sign. Passes unanimously. We did the discussion on the changing of the meetings. So we'll go to number 4, which is update and report on the work of the City County DPS Housing Task Force. Oh.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Mine will be brief. It won't even be 15 minutes. Most subcommittees have been meeting regularly. I want to thank all the residents and folks who are EDs of organizations that have been meeting. We are meeting as a large group in January. I will send that out for those folks who want to join. The housing needs assessment that was funded by the city, the county, and the Chambers Foundation is expected to be released end of January, early February. Some of our subcommittees, including the gap financing subsidy group, or subcommittee, I should say, they're pretty close to the final part of their recommendations, but some of the recommendations may have to shift once they get that data. I think a lot of folks are waiting on that data to impact the recommendations that they'll be bringing forward. I think that's about it, unless anyone has any questions. I've been able to attend almost every subcommittee meeting at least once, so that's been helpful, and it's been really impressive to see folks from different city and county departments, different nonprofit organizations, small local developers really coming to the table and really thinking collaboratively and expansively about how we approach housing in Durham.
Wendy.
Very exciting. I have 2 questions. One, is there a committee that is looking specifically at the current number of, when you said gap financing, but is there an assessment related to the current existing affordable housing and also units that have protections but may lose them, and then also the number of units that are in the pipeline, affordable housing units that have been approved or that the city and county have invested in?
My understanding is that community development is tracking much of that. What the housing needs assessment will be bringing forward is how many units do we need moving forward and at which AMI levels.
Okay, so will we get that information of, an assessment of what we already have and then what's coming online, and also how do we connect people to that system?
Yeah, so the pre-shelter housing subcommittee there is conversation about how do we connect folks, especially folks who have high needs with units. So that is living there, that piece of it. But the tracking of current units would be held by community development, and then there has been, if I'm not mistaken, some work on what we are going to potentially lose. But I'll see Reginald John. He's nodding his head yes at me, so okay. I'm going to say yes. The other thing is that the housing group that Duke pulled together has also been pulling together all publicly held land, including Duke's land. So that is another piece of the equation that folks are doing an analysis. I know that community development did already come to council with a presentation on what the city owns, small parcels, but that are scattered, but that has already been made available to council and made publicly.
Okay. And my second question is, are any of the committees looking at different types of housing and the products that are out there? And
yeah, so some of that is probably living in land use. There's a land use subcommittee, and I think the broader question around like housing type, we haven't gotten that far. We've been mostly focusing on Well, it depends on the subcommittee. So pre-shelter housing has a clear charge. Homeless services has a clear charge. The land use group at least was also addressing any process issues, but the gap financing subcommittee was also doing that. Processes internal, right? That was one of the charges that that I gave folks, was don't just come with funding recommendations, come with process improvements so that departments can get better. So that is definitely being addressed. But as far as housing type, not so much. It depends on, like, if you get into land use, where are we allowing it, right? Then you're going to probably get into what kind of housing could be there if you change the underlying zoning of it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Sure, go ahead, Carl.
Councilmember Caballero, could you describe what the Housing Task Force is doing in terms of permanent supportive housing? How are you looking at that? Who's looking at that?
I would think it's homeless services subcommittee, but the pre-shelter housing may have also been touching some of that as well. Again, I've only gone to one subcommittee meeting of each subcommittee, so I haven't seen every single topic addressed. The chairs are all meeting on Thursday this week to give me kind of an update of where their subcommittee is, what kind of product we plan on producing, like ultimately what the report's going to look like, and then kind of a rundown of what are all the topics that they are covering. So if there's gaps, which I'm hearing a couple questions here today, then we can figure out, okay, is there bandwidth to look into that, and who?
Michelle?
Yeah, since I'm new to all of this, I wanted to know exactly how many of our residents are unhoused or homeless, what percentage?
I don't have a percentage for you. I can say that we are probably undercounting some, and that we have no capacity in our current shelter beds with a pretty long wait list. And maybe somebody can give me a number, because I know it was shared last week. Yeah, and Colin will be presenting here in a little bit, so he can probably address that then. But yeah, there's numbers. We know that those are folks who are actually calling in for services. So for the folks who are living in a car temporarily and hoping to find housing, we don't have numbers on that.
Any other discussion, questions? Thank you, Councilwoman Caballero. I got it right. I got it. When I say that I was practicing that last night, very, very serious about that. All right.
But Vice Chair Lee, one day I'll make you say my whole name, because I only use 2, but I have 5.
Yeah, well, I'm elected for 4 years. So, yeah, one name per year, please. One name per year. All right. Okay. That was just an update. There was no action needed on that item. If there's no further commentary or questions about it, we'll move on to the presentation on homeless services. We've allotted 60 minutes. 58 would be preferred, or less.
Thank you. Well, good morning, commissioners and city council members. Reginald J. Johnson. I serve as the director of the Community Development Department with the City of Durham. And the team here is here to present information on homelessness in Durham and the needs and solutions. And we'll have some information from the city and the county. I would just take the opportunity to remind everyone that the city wears 2 hats with regard to homelessness in Durham. One, that we are funders just as a county in terms of solutions and nonprofit organizations to work to end homelessness and work in support of unsheltered. but also we are the administrators for the Continuum of Care, which is the body recognized by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development that works to end homelessness in Durham City and Durham County. And so with those who had, sometimes some can get them crossed and uncrossed, and so we just want to, recognize that this presentation and what Colin will share mainly will work on the share from the hat of the Continuum of Care. But it also puts some information in a presentation from what the city actually funds. But I just want to make that distinction. And Colin, you may want to just open up with the numbers to the question that was on the floor before in terms of the unsheltered. So just give those basic numbers. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Colin Davis, our homeless manager.
Good morning. We'll get into this in a minute. There was the question about how many people are currently unsheltered as of, and we got the updated numbers yesterday. I just don't have them on the top of my head. So we'll use the number that we had from last week, where we had 50 singles and 51 families that were currently in line waiting for emergency shelter. So it's 100 households. So if you figured out how many households are in Durham County and the city of Durham, that's 100 who are currently looking for shelter. If you look at our point in time numbers, this is all in the presentation, our point in time numbers, we had about 172 unsheltered on a given night in January of 2024, and a little over 400 people who were experiencing homelessness. So take that, I guess, divide it by roughly 300,000. It's 90,000 households. Okay. Individual. Yeah, I just didn't know how many households. Thank you. So divided by so 90,000 households, and you'd have 100 that are unsheltered.
Durham County or Durham City households? City, okay, yeah. County's like 130, yeah.
Okay. All right. So this presentation, I'm going to talk about the city's role, and get through some things, and then hand over to Samantha Smith from the county to talk about county investments in the homeless system. So we'll start with an overview of the homeless system. I know we've got new elected officials, city council members who some of this may look familiar to you. We'll want to make sure everybody's sort of on the same page, using same language and understanding how the system works. The role of the city, public funding, homelessness by the numbers, challenges, solutions, and then any questions that come up. We may hold questions until after Samantha's done, as there'll be a lot combining the two. So let's start with some useful definitions so we all are talking the same way. We have homeless diversion, which is not the same as eviction diversion or homelessness prevention. Diversion in the homeless system, when we are talking about this is somebody who is experiencing unsheltered homelessness or being at risk of homelessness, and they say, hey, you know what, I've got a grandmother in Kalamazoo. If I could just get to my grandmother's, I wouldn't be homeless in Durham. So we have money in our coordinated entry budget that allows for transportation diversion to connect somebody. In order to access that, it's not just a free travel pass. We need to contact the grandmother and verify, yes, you can go to grandmother's house before we invest the money. This isn't just a travel agency to provide vacations. So we use that as a diversion. We also use rapid exit money, where there are people who are unsheltered or in the homeless system, and they might be working and they find a room to rent or an apartment to rent, and all they need is a security deposit, first month rent, and boom, they're going to be fine because they have a history of stability. So in our coordinated entry with diversion, there's some money to help with that security deposit and first month rent, which covers some of the gaps between what the county is doing with their funds, or when the county doesn't have money, or other homeless programs, rapid rehousing, for instance, doesn't have the resources to do it. There's this stopgap that tries to fill that void. It's never enough money, of course. We talk about emergency shelter. Emergency shelter, the goal is 30 days. We know that getting into permanent housing in 30 days is a challenge. And even any of us at this table trying to find a house, move into a place in 30 days is a challenge, even with all the resources available, just due to when's the unit available, when's the security deposit, getting it moved in. So the goal is making emergency shelter as temporary and as effective as possible to get people into their housing and being able to offer extensions as people are working towards that permanent exit strategy. Permanent supportive housing. Permanent supportive housing is HUD funded through our Continuum of Care Notice of Funding of Opportunities, which is released annually. The permanent supportive housing is earmarked only for those who are HUD defined as chronically homeless, meaning you must be homeless for at least 12 months continually or have had 4 or more episodes of homelessness within 3 years, adding up to 12 months. So that's documented, having to go back and trace people's histories of homelessness, even if they've been in multiple states or counties, going back and being able to put that together. And the household, a member of the household must have a disabling condition diagnosed by a professional in that area of expertise. Rapid rehousing, this is for short to medium term financial assistance and supportive services. Think of it as a light touch, somebody coming in 3 months, 6 months, 12 months maybe. Somebody can remain in rapid rehousing for up to 24 months, and that involves a security deposit, rental assistance, supportive services, case management, helping with budget, helping with stabilization, whatever the household needs. And part of the rules, these are federally funded. The rule on rapid rehousing is you cannot receive more than 24 months of rapid rehousing in a 36-month period. If you go 24 months, there is no more financial assistance. You have to sink or swim on your own at that 25 months. If you are evicted and come back into the homeless system, if you lose your housing voluntarily or otherwise, there is a 12-month waiting period before you can get back into rapid rehousing again by federal law. Street outreach, this is supportive services and outreach to households who are experiencing unsheltered homelessness. And the goal is engagement to encourage folks to get connected to resources, emergency shelter, mental health, whatever the case may be, that will help them to move forward and exit unsheltered homelessness. Successful outcomes from street outreach may include connection to emergency shelter as well as permanent destinations and temporary. So this is just a very simple visual of how the homeless system works. All people experiencing homelessness in Durham or at risk of homelessness go through a central entry point. We call it Entry Point Durham, which is made up of Volunteers of America of the Carolinas, as well as DSS staff who handle the phone calls and walk-ins out of the Health and Human Services building. So street outreach workers are able to enter people into the database. All people seeking homeless services are entered into the Homeless Management Information System. We call it HMIS. So the HMIS system is where we hold all the information for people experiencing homelessness and triage referrals from there into emergency shelter beds. So Entry Point holds that master list. People from Entry Point may receive the diversion or rapid exit assistance. They may receive a referral to emergency shelter. When our emergency shelters have a bed become available, they let Entry Point know we've got a bed. They take that bed and contact the person and encourage the person to go to the shelter, that specific shelter, for an intake and moving into the unit. Emergency shelter then goes through another.
Mr. James, one question real quick.
Yes.
So can you confirm, so Entry Point Durham, is that a place, or is that a phone call, or is it both? Like
Both.
It's both, okay.
It's by phone call, or you can go to Health and Human Services building and meet with people in person there. It's a very small staff and not enough to meet the needs of the number of phone calls. So oftentimes when people call, they'll get a voicemail because there's maybe 5 or 7 people total that have to cover a lot of phone calls. So if people are on a phone call doing an intake, leave a voicemail, they will call you back. The emergency shelter, households that are in an emergency shelter are then eligible to self-resolve and move out on their own, find their own ways, or can be referred into another entry point for referral to rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing or housing choice vouchers if or when they were available, or public housing when there's units available. There's a process to ensure equity, and it's not just a who you know and you get entered. There's objective criteria to determine who's most appropriate for a slot when it becomes available, knowing that I would say at least 85% of the people in the homeless system will never benefit from rapid rehousing, permanent supportive housing, or housing choice vouchers, as there's not enough resources.
Well, from the entry point Durham to the permanent housing, there's 2 paths. One is emergency shelter and one is direct. What is the difference in that?
It depends on households. Some households, there might be a bed available to go to emergency shelter. There's really everybody sort of, if you're going to go into the permanent housing solution where you see rapid rehousing, permanent supportive, or other housing programs, you can get to those directly from entry point while you're unsheltered or while you're in emergency shelter.
Okay.
So we just want to make sure that everybody has access to it. And there's no requirement to go to emergency shelter. It's not like we have to go from here to here to here. It's, you can go straight from unsheltered homelessness to permanent supportive housing.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Reginald talked briefly about this, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, just that we, as the lead agency, do a lot with the Homeless Services Advisory Committee and coordinating all of the body of the continuum of care, writing the application, submitting annual reports to HUD, and ensuring the point in time count is done as well, in addition to putting money into the system. So that's our 2 hats. Now we're going to talk about dollars and cents. So the city puts about $1.3 million into homeless services annually out of dedicated housing fund. And this is used for rapid rehousing, unsheltered coordinating agency. And unsheltered coordinating agency, for those who aren't aware, is a mix of street outreach workers as well as being the primary lead of going out when encampments are identified. Right now, there are 73 active encampments that are being monitored and looked at and being worked with. There are a total of 5 positions in that unsheltered coordinating agency to provide supportive services, helping people who are unsheltered, and managing encampments around the city and the county.
Colin,
Yes,
really
ma'am.
quick, could you send for us, especially for new folks, which nonprofit does which piece? Because that gets real confusing for folks.
Sure.
Right? Thank you.
Sure thing. So rapid rehousing as a match for the ESG funds, that money is currently split between Housing for New Hope and Project Access of Durham County. The unsheltered coordinating agency is being administered currently by Housing for New Hope. Coordinated entry with diversion we just spoke about, that is Volunteers of America of the Carolinas. And DSS doesn't take any of that $477,000. They just provide social workers, staff to help with calls as an in-kind. The HMIS, which is Homeless Management Information System, we are required by HUD to have an HMIS system, and we're required to have an HMIS lead agency. So we use the North Carolina Coalition to End Homelessness. They provide all of the technical assistance. They manage the contract with the software vendor. They provide the training, the licenses, assist with all the data cleanup. It's a lot of work that goes into that, and we do a lot of coordinating with them. Landlord engagement, this is the newest iteration. We're just now starting year 3 of landlord engagement, which is being administered by Housing for New Hope. This is going out and recruiting landlords to work with high barrier households exiting the homeless system. This is providing financial incentives to rent to folks that normally landlords are scared to rent to. And we're having good success on that and exceeding the goals in the contract. White Flag Shelter, this is currently being administered by Open Table Ministries and will be standing up, operating out of Yates Baptist Church this cold weather season on nights that it will be 32 degrees or below for cold weather, or 35 degrees if we're anticipating precipitation. So we'll be standing that up later this week for a few nights, and every Monday we'll make a call for the week on what nights it'll be open. We move over to federal entitlement funds. As a city and county, we are an entitlement jurisdiction, so HUD gives money directly to the city to be administered, which is the Emergency Solutions Grant. This is used in Durham for rapid rehousing. That's a total of $175,000. That gets matched with our $200,000 to create $375,000 for rapid rehousing annually out of ESG funds. We are using $300,000 from our Community Development Block Grant, and that Community Development Block Grant is part of our public service. We are capped at 15% by federal law as to how much of that can be used for this. So Housing for New Hope, Urban Ministries, and Families Moving Forward have money to provide supportive services to households experiencing homelessness in the system. HUD offers Continuum of Care funding. This is an annual application. However, this year they moved it to a 2-year award. This year, we're looking at the funds that were just awarded, just over $2 million, with $929,000 going to permanent supportive housing, just over $1 million going to rapid rehousing, and $525,000 of that is prioritized for domestic violence survivors or intimate partner survivors. Yes, ma'am.
I hate to interrupt, but this is kind of throughout the presentation referring to permanent supportive housing. And I understand that you're using federal definitions for things, but where does transitional supportive housing fit into this? Because we know that not everybody, that's another lane that we see a lot of and need. So where would that fit into anything?
It's a great question. So transitional housing is not as high a priority for HUD in terms of its funding using federal dollars. It's still an eligible expense. We do have about 10 transitional housing beds which are administered by TROSA for veterans through their grant per diem program. The easiest thing to look at when HUD's goal is permanent housing, and transitional housing fell out of favor 10 plus years ago. And what you look at, rapid rehousing is essentially transitional housing. Transitional housing used to be, you could be in housing with supportive services and financial assistance for up to 2 years. At the end of 2 years, you graduated and you moved on to permanent housing. Rapid rehousing, you can be in rapid rehousing for up to 2 years and have supportive services. So rapid rehousing is the closest thing we have to transitional housing. The difference is in the old transitional housing models, people would come to a physical structure and they would get really well rooted, do incredibly well, and congratulations, you're doing great. Now we have to uproot you and move you to your new permanent house in a new neighborhood and build new roots, and you've got no supportive services. So in the rapid rehousing model, instead of people coming to one location, they're in their own apartment in their own neighborhood, and at the end of however long they need to be in the rapid rehousing, no more than 2 years, the service provider leaves. The family, the household that's there stays in their home, in their neighborhood where they've built the commitments. So that's the closest we have to transitional housing at this point in time.
Okay, and my other question is, what about undocumented people who are unhoused?
Mm-hmm.
Can they still be served in all of these HUD programs?
Yes, we serve, it's sort of, we'll go back to the old don't ask, don't tell, is sort of, we don't ask about it. The challenge with households who are undocumented is not the homeless system, it's the landlords where you have to have documentation to be able to rent units, being proof of identity, things like that. That's where undocumented households run into challenges at times. It's not in the homeless system, but in the homeless system, if you're experiencing homelessness, we pretty much take everyone.
Thank you.
During the competition season, if we do have groups that are underperforming or groups who decide this doesn't fit their mission anymore, we do go through a reallocation process. And we did just reallocate money from rapid rehousing, DV money from the LGBTQ Center. They determined they were not in a position to continue doing that, so that money was reallocated in the most recent competition. We also get money from the state for Emergency Solutions Grant. And this is, we serve the city of Durham, and it's really important to point out that with COC money and state ESG money, the city of Durham never touches that money. We only serve as the applicant. We forward an application with recommendations, and then HUD will contract directly with the nonprofit entities that are being recommended for funding. Same with the state ESGs. The city will compile the application, go through the process, and submit the application on behalf of the continuum of care to the state. The state will choose to accept the recommendations, and then the state will enter directly into contract with the nonprofit providers. Those funds never hit city or county coffers for contracting. And we sort of, as the city and the lead agency, we serve as an in-between conduit and technical advisor. So this is how money was broken out over the last 2 years for ESG. And ESG funds tend to go up and down a little bit annually. As you'll see, there's a little drop in money. I don't know the logic or how the money drops, but usually what I've seen over the last 5 years is the money may drop $1,000 one year and then it jumps $2,000 the next year. It's just one of those things. This year, we're putting $64,600 into emergency shelter and $105 into rapid rehousing, and nothing into street outreach with this funding source. And that was just based on the way applications came in and how people wanted to spend the money, so we can only put money where applications come in. All said and told, the city is putting in just shy of $4 million. And keep that $4 million in mind, because we're going to start getting into how many people do we have to try and serve with $4 million. This is for the week of December 2nd. 51 families were reporting unsheltered homelessness and wanting to enter a shelter bed. 50 single adults unsheltered. 20 families saying they're at risk of homelessness in 14 days. 20 singles reported risk of homelessness in 14 days. 2 people exited shelter and called back the next day wanting to get back into shelter. The Durham Rescue Mission had 1 person exit and call the system. We've been tracking that because the Rescue Mission has a lot of people coming from out of the area that are new to Durham, and we've been tracking that for some time just to see how does that shake out. We've had 5 people seeking homeless services in Durham that were calling from other counties. And these are from other countries. We didn't have any from other countries, but we have had families that have arrived by plane from other cities that started off in other countries, and other cities have plane trained, automobiled folks to Durham or Raleigh and end up trying to get connected to resources once they're here. Yes.
And going back to that slide, what is our current strategy around the folks coming here from other counties that are And do we know those counties that are literally being given a bus ticket to Durham? And folks who are also coming to the rescue mission that end up back out on the street, do we currently have a strategy around trying to get those folks back to where they came from, or to families or whatever?
That's the goal, is from folks who are calling from other counties, we try and encourage them to stay in the county they're in. Don't come here because we don't have resources available. Those exiting the rescue mission from other counties or other states, the goal is to try and get them back to those areas. Oftentimes, the people are like, I don't want to go back there. I left there for a reason. So they stay. And we can't make people leave. We are finding, I was talking to Nicole at Entry Point, and she was saying the majority of folks who are going to rescue mission and end up homelessness in Durham from North Carolina counties tend to be Lumberton and Fayetteville. And Lumberton and Fayetteville folks are coming to the rescue mission and they decide it's not a good fit for them and exit and become homeless in Durham and don't necessarily want to go back to those areas. Yes.
I would like to ask a question, for clarification for the room here. As it relates to families that are calling, the 51 families that are reporting being unsheltered and adults that are reporting being unsheltered, how much vetting is done on those folks who are calling in terms of their eligibility for services?
That's a great question. So this is all by self-report. We don't have folks going out and verifying, are you literally living in a car? Are you literally living in a tent? When people express they are unsheltered, we do make referrals to the Unsheltered Coordinating Agency for street outreach. And because there's not enough staff to meet the need, they go out and meet with folks as often as possible. We do sometimes get well, I'm living in my car. Okay, well, where are you staying in your car? Well, tell me where you're going to be at a certain time and I'll be there. It's like, well, where do you typically stay? Well, just tell me where you want to meet me. We're coming to meet you where you're staying. So there's sort of this back and forth at times of where folks are. We do talk to the public school system, and families that are living in their cars that are in the public school system, they're reporting most of those families are able to live in their cars either in driveways or near family or friends. And the family or friends are like, you can stay in your car, you can use our bathroom, you can eat indoors, we just can't let you stay in the house, there's not enough room in the house, or it's a lease violation, but you can park the car here and do that. So there's a good number of folks who are kind of in this, I don't want to say couch surfing, they're car surfing, but they've got access to toilets and food. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, that's the question I had coming being a public school educator, like how, because we know there's a lot of homelessness unhoused students, and how would they access these services? Like, would they go through the school social worker? Like, yeah, what's the process around that?
That's a great question. Thank you for bringing that up. Department of Education has one definition of homelessness. HUD has a totally different definition. And the two are mutually exclusive, except for when you are literally unsheltered. So Department of Education, when you're doubled up, tripled up in a house, the doubled and tripled families are considered homeless for McKinney-Vento. Doubled and tripled in housing for the HUD is not homeless until a landlord or somebody else says, you've got 14 days to be out of this house. At 14 days, you're at risk of imminent homelessness and can be put on a wait list, but you're going to be at the bottom of the wait list for prioritization for shelter because you're not literally unsheltered. And there's right here 51 people reporting unsheltered homelessness. So we're going to worry about the unsheltered while you still have a place for 14 days. Once you're unsheltered, you go to the top of the priority list, unless we can find a way to move you to another permanent housing solution. So having two federal definitions, and there's actually a third definition where Health and Human Services gets involved. So if there's anybody who wants to argue and lobby with the federal government to come up with one definition of homelessness, that would be fantastic. So let's look at how many people did we actually serve last year? And this is looking at the last fiscal year. Street outreach, 375 people were served. Out of that 375 people, 246 were new. The balance were carried over from the year before. Emergency shelter, 867 people. Out of that 867, 757 were new. Rapid rehousing, 269, only 104 new people during this time period. Permanent supportive housing, which includes VASH in our data reporting system, and the reason VASH is included in there is VASH, to qualify for VASH in the veterans system, have to be a chronically homeless veteran, and it comes with a voucher and supportive services. So 443 people, 114 of those were new. So it's very small numbers of new admissions on an annual basis into these projects when you're looking at the totality of numbers served. Looking at our point in time count, if you look at our 2024 point in time, our unsheltered number at 172, which is 600 times greater than what it was in 2016, that's a huge jump. Even if you go to 2020, 2019, pre-pandemic, doubling since the pandemic. The total number of people experiencing homelessness has only gone up about 50 people over that same time period, but the unsheltered numbers are where we're seeing a big jump because our shelter capacity can't keep up with it. Our rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing can't keep up with it. And when you don't have a way to exit people and have people be able to sustain themselves without financial assistance, when there's not enough affordable housing for very, very low AMI, area median income households, it slows down the transition to exit homelessness. Yes, ma'am.
So on that slide, can you explain the relationship between unsheltered and transitional? Because also in 2016, we had a much larger number. Mm-hmm. So is there something happening with definitions there, or what is that happening there?
Sure. So 2016, there were more transitional housing providers. At one point, Families Moving Forward was a transitional housing program. That became an emergency shelter. We had VOA had a transitional housing program for veterans that was included in there. They've moved, that transitional housing program is now a permanent housing for leases. So we've just seen transitional housing as using HUD funds for transitional housing is harder to do. People have been shifting to emergency shelter or rapid rehousing models.
So if we had more transitional housing, would we see that number in unsheltered be lower?
Potentially, if you had more transitional housing. The challenge you have with transitional housing is typically capped at 2 years. And if you had a physical structure, you've got to make sure you've got enough affordable permanent housing that people can leave that structure and move into a permanent affordable dwelling at the end of that.
Well, we've just been spending a lot of money, the city and the county, on affordable housing. Mm-hmm. That's in the pipeline.
You're correct.
So.
I need a follow-up question, but the 2-year thing is the same for transitional and permanent supportive housing? Mm-hmm. No. Okay.
Permanent supportive housing, people may remain in permanent supportive
housing.
I'm thinking
of
rapid rehousing
okay.
and transitional are the same.
Okay.
And the rapid rehousing, people are in their own apartment.
Right. No, I remember. I was just getting confused.
Yeah.
But we're not. No, because it's a point in time. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You got it.
I guess, well, are we tracking separately then the folks who are in rapid rehousing? Do you see what I'm saying? Because we're not tracking it here, so where are we tracking it?
So that's part of our system performance measures that we track exits and successes on rapid rehousing.
Okay. And then a success is obviously a permanent unit.
In rapid rehousing, by definition, you're in a permanent unit because you have a lease in your name for 1 year or longer.
Okay, I guess I don't consider that permanent. I understand that definitionally, yes.
Right.
But I'm saying when somebody exits a rapid rehousing, to me, whether it's permanent supportive housing, because we realize this is an individual who needs supportive services for a long time, right? Or they don't. I guess what I want to know is from that rapid rehousing, whether it's
even if it's not a requirement by HUD definitions, I feel like we should be tracking that so that we can have our own. I mean, to me, successful is somebody has a unit that they live in, either with services because they need it, or without services because they're fine. And so that's success. And so if we're not tracking that, ultimately, then how do we know if we're meeting our goals?
We track recidivism. So every year we run reports looking at how many people exited homelessness to permanent housing and how many of those people returned to the Durham homeless continuum of care over a 6-month, 12-month, 18-month, 2-year period. So our recidivism is less than 15%. And depending on which intervention we're looking at, I can pull the reports for you.
That would be helpful.
But
there's a story that needs to be told. I mean, at the end of the day, this is people funding either through their federal taxes or their property taxes for a lot of things. And so that story needs to be told of this is how we are being successful with all of these dollars. And so I think right now we're not telling that story, and we need to do a better job telling that story.
Sure. It's part of our annual report to HUD that goes in our longitudinal system analysis that reports out our recidivism rates on how many people exited from emergency shelter to permanent housing. Out of that group, how many returned to homelessness over certain periods of time. Out of I think permanent supportive housing and rapid rehousing might get lumped together in that report, but we could run reports.
Yeah, and I think for decision makers, I think what I want to see is like that loop back to us.
Sure.
So that we know that when we are deciding public dollars, that we're making the right decision, and that the public, I mean, many of us were at a very large gathering last week specifically on a lot of concern around increasing homelessness in Durham. And so, again, decision makers have to be able to go back to the public and say, these are the interventions, and we are making the best decisions and, best bang for our buck. Thank you.
Be happy to pull that report to you together and send it to you all.
And on this question of recidivism, is that also something you can benchmark against other cities in North Carolina or throughout the region to give a sense of how we're doing compared to our peers? That'd be also telling that story would be very helpful.
So the short answer is yes. The more nuanced answer is we would have to look and see if the data from other jurisdictions is publicly available. Otherwise, we would have to go out and ask our colleagues, hey, are you willing to share your recidivism reports if it's not something that's publicly on a public dashboard.
But isn't that reported to HUD?
It's reported to HUD. It's a performance measure. It's reported to HUD. I don't know off the top of my head right now whether or not all of those data points are on a public dashboard on a HUD website off the top of my head. I'd have to go look.
But it is public on some level. It's gettable data.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks.
Colin, if I might, thank you so much for the report thus far. I remember we had a bit of a philosophical discussion in HSAC some years ago when I first started doing liaison work, and that is the tension between rapid rehousing and emergency beds with limited resources. And the more we put into emergency shelters, the less we have to focus on rapid rehousing. The more we put into rapid rehousing, the less we have to focus on emergency shelter. We need both, but we have limited resources. And I'm just wondering, on that kind of sliding scale between those polar points, if you will, moving forward, what should be this is probably not a fair question to you. Do we still need to be focusing on getting folk keys immediately, or? So I heard somebody say yes. And how do we also address the emergency shelter beds with limited resources?
So we have some proposed solutions at the end, but to answer your question briefly, you need both.
Right.
And giving somebody keys is part of it. You also have some folks who are experiencing homelessness with very high needs, very high barriers, behavioral health, mental health, substance abuse. So giving somebody those keys, if they're having issues while they're unsheltered and they don't have adequate supports in a new home with their own keys, the same behaviors, the same issues that you're seeing out on the streets are going to happen in the apartment. or house or whatever it is that may lead to lease violations and eviction, and then the cycle starts again. The other side is we as individuals in America have the right to self-determination. We can choose whether we accept or reject services. And there are folks who accept services for a period of time and then decide, I don't want this anymore. And will lock the door and stop answering the phone calls. And then you run into $25,000 of damages to an apartment sometimes. So it's a very delicate dance, and it's working with folks and making sure you've got the adequate support to be there to help households and keep them self-sustaining and help them be able to maintain the unit, maintain their health, whether it be mental health, physical health, or whatever. It's working through all of those pieces. It's not as easy as just give everybody a house. Give everybody a house, but there's also a lot of other things that go along with it. We also have a group of people currently in the homeless system that are, yes, I want housing. Great. Put them in an apartment. And, we need you to pay $5 or $50 towards this. I'm not paying towards that. Somebody else needs to pay the bill. So when you have people refusing to pay towards their rent, how do you deal with that? Because we do have people who will literally, when it's time for them to pay $100, here are my keys, I'm going back to homelessness.
All right. So that, of course, is the answer when folk kind of say to folk like us, just build more housing or just get, and I get that. I guess my statement of concern was more to when you have a pot of limited resources and folk looking at us, or it looks like it looks like we aren't being effective in terms of getting people off the street in an emergency situation when we're actually using more resources towards rapid rehousing. Some of the folk may not be ready for.
Correct.
On the other hand, if we're doing emergency shelters and folk are looking at us and saying, well, you're just putting folk in shelters, what about the keys? And I just want the public to understand that tension between limited resources and doing both. Speaking of delicate balance, I also want to say with respect to, and I'm very sensitive to Commissioner Jacobs' question about other municipalities and governments and folk arriving here. We had a situation with Fayetteville, and I spoke with my colleagues daily in Fayetteville about the situation. We need to be careful. A lot of the arguments that we find cringeworthy in the national discussion, I've heard some of them employed at the local level. Folk who need help, we'll welcome somebody from another country, but Fayetteville's a problem. So I just want to kind of caution us in some of the arguments we've been using in terms of Durham being a welcoming place. If you're coming here, relocating here, but you're in the housing market, that's a qualitatively different welcome than if you're coming here because you need help, or if you need to access our resources. And listen, I'm a government person. I understand limited resources, but I do want to just kind of, and even when we talk to other municipalities, understanding that Durham's got a reputation of being, welcoming and maybe doing a better job with our resources than others. And we certainly don't want to other municipalities think they can just send people here. But I do want us to recognize the symmetry, if you will, between some of the arguments that are being used for folk coming here writ large at the macro level nationally, and some of the arguments we use folk coming just across the county line, for whatever that's worth. So thank you.
Now, this is sort of looking at exits to permanent housing out of different outreach. So street outreach has about 23% of people going from unsheltered into permanent housing and for the year that just ended. Coordinated with diversion has about 23% of their people who are calling going straight from coordinated entry to permanent housing. Emergency shelter, rapid rehousing combined is at about 34% of folks exiting those into permanent housing. So when you're looking at this, roughly 70–80% of folks who are in these go to temporary housing situations where they might double up or return to unsheltered homelessness or go to a psychiatric hospital or a jail sometimes. So there are a lot of folks who sort of don't move to permanent housing for a variety of reasons.
Mr. Davis, what's the for the percentages? What's the denominator for those?
So that would be,
Because they don't end up to,
so 273 is your numerator on the emergency shelter. I'd have to go back and pull the denominator. So 273 is 34%. I'd have to go back to do algebra. Sorry.
I'm like, I'm just wondering what that sort of, what's the
The total number of,
Yeah.
of folks in that. I can pull it.
okay, thanks.
All right, Samantha will be our mathematician and do some algebra for us.
Colin, when you talked about definitions of documenting homelessness, that is particularly related to eligibility for permanent supportive housing. When somebody ends up in the jail, or they are in a shelter, does that count when they're in the jail, that they are unhoused?
No. When you're in, no. When you're in jail, this is where it gets really nuanced in the regulations. When you're in a jail or a hospital or another institution for 90 days or less, it's counted one way, and it's counted a different way if you're 90 days or longer. And if you're chronically homeless before you go to jail, the chronic homelessness stays intact.
Yeah.
But while you're in jail, you are not
Yeah.
considered homeless.
I just want to raise this up. I know Councilmember Capier and I, we've been in conversations about this, that this also highlights the need for local funding where we have local control, because these definitions are ridiculous and they are not meeting the needs of people. And what we see right now happening, which, you know, we've heard from, we had a big meeting with the business community, what we see in Familiar Faces, in the HEART program, what we see in the Stepping Up initiative, with GAPS, what we see Durham Joints Together to Save Lives, with our Mental Health and Treatment Committee. The common denominator is people who have severe mental illness and substance use disorder. They are just going to keep cycling in and out of the jail, our emergency departments, the homeless shelter, and I don't see anywhere on this chart of how these people are being able to be helped.
Yeah, excuse me, that was the question I had. I wanted to know, because I'm learning all of this, right? What are the reasons why people are becoming homeless, unsheltered? Is it a myriad of reasons? Is it, substance abuse, mental health, economic issues, and how the resources that we have, how is that helping them not to cycle in and out of homelessness?
So people become homeless for all the reasons you explained. There is no one overarching issue. We have people who are becoming homeless because the house they've been renting for 20 years, the owners decide to sell it. And this is somebody who had a fixed income, and the owner was willing to rent it to him for $500 a month for the last 20 years. Can't find a place to rent for $500 a month. And if you're only making $963 a month on SSI, where are you going to live in Durham? Where are you going to live anywhere in the country, for that matter? It's not just Durham. You can't find, even renting a bedroom in this area is $600 to $800 a month. So, when we talk about affordable housing, we're talking about 30% AMI. 30% AMI units are affordable for people who make 30% of the area median income. If I make 10% of the area median income, I cannot afford the rent of a 30% AMI unit without a housing choice voucher, without some other ongoing subsidy. That 30% unit does not adjust downward based on my income percentage, where public housing and housing choice vouchers are statutorily required to take 30% of your adjusted income. Affordable housing at 30 and 60% AMI, the rent is calculated at a fixed amount at 30% AMI. If I make 10% AMI, I can live in the 30% AMI unit. I qualify for it, but I can't afford that fixed rate number, the fixed rent dollar amount. So these are the pieces that subsidies are heavily needed, even in all the affordable housing we do for the most low-income households who are experiencing homelessness. We are looking at shared housing, roommate situations. How do we find landlords that are willing to rent 2 or 3 bedroom units to 2 or 3 different people with separate leases for the same unit? It's moderate success on that. But it's also, landlords are, why do I want to do 3 leases for a 3 bedroom unit when it's a 3 bedroom unit? It should be 1 lease, and a landlord might want it. So if one person leaves, the other 2 are fully responsible for the rent, and they can't afford it on 2. They can't afford it on 1. They'd have 3 to make it affordable. Let's look at our sort of our inventory as we're looking at this. Pre-pandemic, we had 80 beds for homeless men. We were at 50 and recently increased to 62 beds for men. We had 30 beds pre-pandemic, and we're at 15 beds for women post-pandemic. We have 8 bedrooms for families at Urban Ministries and 21 rooms for families. So we've got 28 bedrooms for families, 29 bedrooms for families in the entire homeless system in Durham. And 15 beds for women and 62 beds for men. Some of that is related to having spoken with Urban Ministries about this. Some of this is new beds were purchased, and previous beds were 28 inches wide. New beds are 36 inches, which takes up floor space. Pre-pandemic beds were about 8 inches, 12 inches apart, which became a mobility issue for wheelchairs and walkers to get through. So they've had to make room for disabling conditions to be able to access beds. So this is the only beds we have in our system. Durham Rescue Mission does provide space for people experiencing homelessness. Rescue Mission is not part of the homeless continuum of care, as homelessness is not a prerequisite for their program. They also have different ways of handling things that are not in alignment with the way the continuum of care operates. Rescue Mission does provide a very valuable service for a group of people it works incredibly well for. It's sort of, all shelters don't work well for people, all rescue missions don't work well for people. People live in apartments, they love apartments. There's people who love single family homes, and there's not one program that works better or doesn't work better. It's what works for that particular household at that particular time.
So, out of curiosity, now that we're talking about emergency shelter inventory, like, how do we track, like, Alliance has 12 beds? Like, how do we track that, and, like, who qualifies for those kinds of beds? How do we build that into our system if it's not included? I'm sure there's certain barriers or criteria for those beds, but my understanding is it is for emergency, and so, yeah.
That's a piece that we need to get into with Alliance and figure out what the referral process is. These are the beds that we as a coordinated entry system have the ability to place people into. And we don't have the ability to say, Alliance, here's somebody, take this because you got an empty bed. Alliance has their intake process for a particular clientele.
So as we think about, and I know like Commissioner Jacobs is doing like the familiar faces, and we've seen in other cities, hospital systems, because they're realizing that like having unsheltered folks in their emergency room system is more expensive than just providing a couple beds. As we hopefully move in that kind of direction, I guess my one, it has to be cohesive, right? Because then we just lose track and then folks aren't getting served.
Correct. Yes.
And this is kind of a no-brainer, but I understand what you just said, but I still don't understand why we're operating at pre-pandemic levels, because that's a huge difference between 110 versus 65 beds when we have increased need. So I would really like to understand why we're not back to.
There's no room. The new beds took up room, and in order to fit all the wider beds and allow wheelchairs and walkers to get through, that's what I've been told by Urban Ministries, is they physically do not have the space to go back to 30 and 80 with the new beds and being able to create room for people with walkers and wheelchairs to access the beds and get through.
And again, those new beds, that's like that's a new HUD standard.
I think this was just during the pandemic, they upgraded their beds. They ordered new bunk beds. It was time to replace them, and the new bed size is and we are getting larger as society, and 24, 28-inch wide beds, they went to a standard full-size twin bunk bed, so it's a 36-inch wide frame versus the 28-inch wide frame. And when you add that times as many beds as you are, 8 inches times a lot of beds eats up a lot of floor space pretty quickly.
Okay.
And pre-pandemic, my understanding is the beds were literally almost a foot apart from each other. So you're kind of walking sideways in between the beds, and if you're in a wheelchair or a walker, it makes it almost impossible. And we are seeing more mobility challenges coming into the homeless system as our society is getting older and sicker. That same trend continues with people experiencing homelessness. So now we talk about current gaps in the system. Coordinated entry with diversion. They have a contract for $477,000 a year. This is a while, there's less than $50,000 left now. So if we had an extra $200,000, we could help another 233 households, either diverting them or rapidly exit homelessness. But right now, the limited money they have until June 30th of this year in their contract is only allowing for travel diversions, bus tickets out of town. Emergency shelter, our inventory used to be 110 beds, and right now we're at 77 beds. So that leaves us 33 beds that are available, or used to be available, that we need to find 33 beds to get back to that 110. As of the time I put this slide together, there were 50 beds needed. So if we were able to go back to that 110, there would still be 17 people unsheltered. If we wanted to house those 17 people and have 17 beds available at any given moment, we're looking at $620,000, and that's just putting people in a hotel room. No food, no supportive services, nothing. That's just buying a motel room, saying, here you go, you're off the street, you're in a motel, for a year worth of services for that gap of 17. Clearly that number would be significantly higher if we had to add that 50, that 17, and you needed 67 beds. Instead of 17, you'd take that 620 and multiply it out. We have a gap of 50 rooms, and we're looking at $1.8 million of just renting a hotel room. And I use the hotel room just as a rough order of magnitude. And even if you could find a cheaper housing solution instead of $100, $110 a night hotel room, you would end up using at least that amount of money to cover food, case management, supportive services, security, all of the things that go along with operating an emergency shelter to keep people fed and warm and safe. We look at our rapid rehousing. As of this week, there were 87 people on the wait list waiting for a unit to become available for rapid rehousing. It would cost us a minimum of $1.3 million to take care of that 87 people annually. And that would just clear the deck. And there would be new people coming in to fill that void. Right now, we've got 110 units, 116 beds total of permanent supportive housing. There were 6 units available. There were 36 people currently on that list waiting for permanent supportive housing. And at a minimum, just to clear that 36 would cost you $700,000. Yes, ma'am.
So the slide, the slide that you're showing here related to rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing, those are individuals that are already in the system, and we know that those needs are here, like right now. Is that different than the ones on the previous slide that haven't been vetted in the system?
Those folks are not included in this number.
No, not only not included. I know these people are in the system, and we know that they need these resources as their next step. When you flip back to the slide before that, when we talk about the folks who are waiting, those 25 and 25, some of those people are not vetted at this point.
Correct.
And I just wanted to make sure that we keep that in mind.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, these folks were this gap of unsheltered, where we talked about the 100 households, 101 households that are unsheltered. We don't know how many of them would need rapid rehousing or permanent supportive housing. In theory, every one of them, because if they are truly unsheltered and homeless, you could take that 100 households and add that to that 87 and be at 187, no problem whatsoever on making that jump. Out of that 100 households, I don't have a way of saying how many would qualify for permanent supportive housing, but 101 households that are unsheltered would qualify for rapid rehousing, because that's the only requirement for rapid rehousing is experiencing literal homelessness.
So I have a follow-up on that. So, because I might be confusing some things, but there was that initial RFP that community development did with set-asides for special populations. How are we, I'm assuming some of these folks would qualify for those units, so then how are we tracking and how are we matching? So again, it goes back to that, are we meeting our goals, right? So that was with the affordable housing bond. Some of those things are built or in contract, and so what's happening there?
Sure. So every Thursday, we have a by name list meeting, and every Thursday, we are looking at what rapid rehousing program has vacancies and can accept a referral. And then we go through that list of 87 people and say, who's at the top of the list to take that one empty spot? And there's some weeks that go by, there's no openings. And months go by where there's no openings because there's only so much money. And as the money goes in, sometimes the amount of money needed to cover the rent goes up if somebody has lost a job, which means I can't necessarily take another person because I'm not sure how long it's going to take me to free up some cash to get somebody into the next unit. So every week we're adding people or making referrals when openings become available based on need.
But that's across any place we have a unit. I guess what I'm asking is, how are we tracking our own success with that initial? I know the second round didn't have set-asides for special populations. I want to know specifically with those.
With the bond funds.
Yeah, with the bond fund. Ross Road, Hardy Street, Reinvestment Partners, Harriet Place. I want to know about that.
So that's affordable housing.
My understanding is that there was a set-aside specifically for special populations in that tranche of projects, and I want to know how we're tracking that.
So what I would say was that, for example, in Reinvestment Partners, as well as all of the projects, there are units that are set aside for 30% and below. There have to be, because those are requirements of our funding. The question you're asking is who has access to those and where the referral comes. Right now, with the exception of, I think, Hardy Street and Reinvestment Partners, the project Harriet's Place, the developers and the managers develop their own lists with people who are among this group that meet the income limits. They make their own, take their own application process.
What do you mean by that?
What I'm saying is they solicit people who are households who meet the income limits, and they make their own decisions about who they serve on those relative to their application list.
Okay, and I guess what I'm saying is how do we connect that to the folks who are already serving these populations in our continuum of care? Because if we're not lining that up properly, it's a huge missed opportunity, and that's what we sold the public. We said that there was going to be a set-aside of special populations, and right now we're letting folks decide who those people are going to be. I don't care if they, obviously, what individual, but I want a clear alignment with what we're building to the nonprofits who are already getting city dollars so that we can track and know that we're meeting our goals. And right now, I'm not hearing that. So moving forward, we need to kind of close that loop and have a better sense of it.
Yes, and I do agree with that. And one of the things we're going to be doing is putting in our contracts that requirement.
But they're not in our contracts currently. So we just missed out, and I will own ignorance on where we are in each one of these, but that was that was a miss on our part, and it wasn't a small miss.
Yes.
I just want to thank Councilmember Capiera for articulating exactly what I'm thinking, but saying it in a much better way. Yeah, and I would just say that even if it's not in the contracts, I think we have a collaborative enough community where we all work together, where we still can bring people together right now and say, let's work together on this. We know we have this pipeline already. We have these identified people. We have this resource that we have invested public dollars in. It's not, we can do this now. And so that's what I would also like to see happen. And I'm also wondering, where do folks who we have identified, who we know from heart, from familiar faces, from all of the great work that our collective staff are doing, our Shauna's here from Justice Services, our jail health folks know the people who have the severe mental illness and substance use that are identified here, maybe in the permanent supportive housing group, that are then, that are priority populations because of what's happening in places like downtown. I mean, I just had a meeting with the head of the emergency department at Duke Hospital yesterday, who they're experiencing the same thing that our downtown businesses are, where their staff in the emergency department and the patients sitting in the waiting room are also being harassed and feeling demoralized from this people with very severe needs. How are we identifying those people as priority for some of the units, supportive housing units that we may have?
So one of the things that I would also share is that it's a bit more than just having a unit with a key. It is the supportive housing and the cost that goes with that, meaning the mental assistance, all of that goes with it. And even when we have units outlined, that cost needs to come with those units for it to be able to serve that population, versus Reginald Johnson just giving me a key, I meet the income limits, and I can just move in, and I'm good to go. That's a different set of population.
May I, Chair? So I wanted to sort of add on to what Reginald has said, because I want, I know we are, as a community, we really, really want to serve people who have a need and serve the need that they actually have. But as it relates to the request for proposals that the city put out, those proposals, development opportunities, even in both of the requests for proposals, none of those proposals really were dedicated specifically to provide permanent supportive housing. Would that be a?
That's correct.
None of them were. But in the conversations, some of those developers or partners have had a history of trying to serve those who have the greatest need. But in those, multi-income, which some have very low income, with the support of vouchers and other project-based, housing vouchers, when we're talking about people exiting homelessness, a lot of them do need permanent supportive housing. Rapid rehousing may be slightly different. Sometimes those conditions, allow someone to go directly into, a place where they don't need as much support. But when you look at these slides, the permanent supportive housing for some of the folks that you're mentioning is, those people are not going to be good candidates for these multifamily, multi-income housing developments. So I just wanted to make sure that it doesn't look like we were not meeting the needs of those proposals, because we were.
Also, Mr. Chair, if I, so I think this is a really rich conversation. I really appreciate the presentation here and the questions we're asking. We're asking hard questions of our staff about money we've invested, what the needs still are. And I think, like, beyond all of this conversation, it's clear that there's greater needs than we have in the system, right? And so I don't know how long our conversation will go today, but I just want to put it on the table for all the electeds here that part of the challenge we have for ourselves is how do we address this need? We need to produce more. Right, so we've got to invest in more, and that's a big question for us as well, that I hope we'll get to, if not today, soon.
I will say, one of the things that's really important for us to remember, homelessness, while it is a problem, is really the larger symptom of all the other failures in the systems around it. The homeless system has historically been the place that has absorbed everybody that's fallen through the cracks. We go back to the 80s and the Reagan administration when federal mental health hospitals were shut down. Institutions have been shut down saying, oh, people who thrived, and I'm not saying institutions are a good thing, but there are some people who thrive in a highly regimented therapeutic environment. That environment does not exist. So now it's the homeless system's responsibility to absorb people who thrived in an institution setting with 24-hour psychiatry, 24-hour medication management, 24-hour, behavioral programs. How do you recreate that without millions and millions and millions of dollars to serve this small number of people that need a highly structured 24-hour supervision, 24-hour security, 24-hour medication reminders? All of these pieces need to go together and to do that. And that's the piece where we are talking about some of these severe and persistent mental health issues. Yes, we've got ACT teams. Yes, we've got mental health providers who can come out and meet with people. We've got people who can go to people in their houses 3 days a week. And it goes back to how many of us have taken an antibiotic that was prescribed for 10 days and after 3 days we feel better, throw away 7 days of it. People do it all the time. Doctor says, hey, drink more water, and we drink more coffee. People experiencing homelessness have the same challenges. They go in, they start feeling better, they quit taking their medication. I don't like the side effects this has. They have the right to do that. They also have the right to stop answering their door and answering the phone calls. How many times do you have somebody knock on your door trying to sell you something and you don't open the door? Well, people who are experiencing homelessness, have severe mental health and substance abuse, can choose not to open their door to the providers if they don't want to. And that is a common thing that happens. It's not an all the time, but it happens enough that it's how do you solve for this piece when we need more resources and millions and millions and millions of dollars to make it all happen, because you're recreating all of the support systems that are no longer in existence.
So this is very rich and important conversation. I want to make sure you all get through your slides, because I know the county has some slides as well. So I want to. No, I want you to get through. I want you to get through your information. I just want to know, this is. We're continuing on kind of a long time here, so I want to keep us moving.
Okay. So let's look at some challenges here. One, rescue mission. Rescue mission, like I said, they provide a very valuable service and make a very big difference to some people. Some people, it's not the right fit for a variety of reasons. From July 1, 2024 to November 25th, 2024, 63 people exited rescue mission and called entry point for assistance. Out of that 63, only 12 started at Durham. 11 of them came from other states to the rescue mission for more for assistance and a better life. 29 were from other counties, and those 29, the majority that came to rescue mission, according to entry point, were Lumberton and Fayetteville residents originally. And this is not municipalities shipping people. This is people hearing about and saying, hey, I've got a better life in this area, or this program can meet my needs. We have seen a temporary reduction in affordable housing units and public housing as the Housing Authority is redeveloping. Housing Authority, when they redevelop, have to relocate anybody who's in existing structures before they're demolished to rebuild. So they'll move everybody. They don't make anybody homeless. They do move people into other housing. But when you tear down hundreds of units to rebuild them, you're taking hundreds of units offline until new hundreds are rebuilt. So we do have a temporary shortfall while we're going through all the redevelopment and new construction. At the end of the housing bond, there should be a lot more affordable housing in Durham, which hopefully will it meet the needs? Probably not. It hopefully will meet some of the needs in the system. We've also had the reduction in emergency shelter beds that I shared earlier, and there's not enough long-term rent subsidies that can be paired with supportive services. The Housing Authority doesn't have more vouchers that are being given out on a regular basis. Rapid Rehousing has, we just saw that under $500,000 total in Rapid Rehousing, and about, it's actually more than that. About 1.7 million of rapid rehousing assistance, but that also includes supportive services. That's not just rental subsidies. So having the rental subsidies, having the support services are really key, like we just talked about a moment ago. So now you say,
I just have one quick question, because again, I'm learning, the Durham Rescue Mission doesn't receive money from the county or the city?
Correct.
Okay.
They're all privately funded. So solutions. These are going to be proposed solutions. We know that this proposed solution is a drop in the bucket, and if elected officials have a palate to increase the dollar amounts, we are happy to do so. The proposal that's being put forth is something that we looked at, saying this would be a reasonable request to the city and to the county from the Homeless Services Advisory Committee, and a recommendation to start closing some of these gaps where we'll be able to start seeing some level of change. And this would be a one-year investment with an asterisk, knowing that once you start investing, you're going to have to continue it. So this is for certain pieces of it, a continuation of investment is going to be required, and we'll talk about that. So the proposed request is a $1.2 million request to the city to add an additional $200,000 for diversion and rapid exits to help people exit homelessness. Increase our street outreach capacity to serve more households that are unsheltered. As we see that number going up, there's only 5 people managing 73 encampments, which is just not sustainable. So that'd be an additional $300,000 to bring in supplies and street outreach workers to assist unsheltered folks get connected to shelter or other permanent destinations. Then we talk about the flexible housing subsidies. $700,000 would allow flexible rental subsidies and supportive services to meet the variety of needs, and potentially could serve up to 35 households. If we got really creative and needed to create something where we had 24-hour on-site care and some of these other things, that 35 would drop drastically. But this is our best guess of what the proposed request is. And this is Policy and Planning Committee met yesterday, and they agreed that this was a recommendation that will be coming forth to the HSAC for formal adoption. Could it be changed? Possibly, but for the most part, this is the current recommendation. And a $1.2 million request to the county, and the $1.2 million request to the county would be to expand emergency shelter capacity. And in Policy and Planning, we discussed how much money would that be, and it would be no more than $1 million of that 1.2 would go to emergency shelter capacity. And the goal would be to get us back, to not just get back to the pre-pandemic shelter beds, but to add beds. So in order to get back to pre-pandemic, we would need 15 beds for women and 18 beds for men. So for this $1 million, the minimum would be 16 women and 19 men and at least one family to increase capacity. Hopefully we would get more out of that. The other thing with emergency shelter capacity, this could be used to fund non-traditional shelter ideas. It could be pallet homes, safe parking, tent sanctioned encampments. It could be anything that could qualify as a temporary shelter structure to bring people out of the elements, provide services, food, and meet a temporary need while they're working on a permanent housing solution. Yes,
Just to be clear, so that's to combine 2.4 million city and county, and that's in the budget, or like right now. This is not next year's budget.
this is for next year's budget.
For next year's budget. This is not, okay, so nothing between now and middle of next year, right?
So just to be clear, council member, these dollars requested that the Homeless Services Advisory Committee will request are not in any budget right now.
This is additional.
Exactly, but again, you're talking, this would be as of July 1 next year, right?
Correct.
So,
There's nothing being requested mid-year. If there's money available, we're happy to put forth a request for mid-year allocations.
certainly there are needs, yeah, that's why I'm, just raising that.
Is there a need? Yes.
Yeah.
But Colin, you said that there's only like $40,000 left right now in diversion funds.
That's correct.
And that's not included in this 2.4 million.
There's an additional $200,000 for diversion funds that's being asked of the city.
But you just said this is all for next year, though, right?
This is all for next year.
Yeah,
There
but
is-
I'm concerned about, and I know we're going to have the county present and DSS, we're also running out of our eviction diversion money. So I do want to put a pin on the fact that there is need for assistance right now.
Yes.
Okay.
I totally agree. There's money needed immediately. If money's available, we are happy to put forth a proposal and put out an RFP to absorb it into the system before the year. At this point, community development, we've been looking to see if we've got money in our budget, and our money's tied up in everything else. So,
Well, doesn't need an RFP. It's just replenishing the coffers of what already exists. I mean, at least on the county side. So.
If I might, Mr. Chair, I have a question about using the money and how creative we'll get with expanding capacity for beds. If 8 inches times a number of beds is stressing capacity at existing places, then where are we going to put these other beds, and how much of that money will be absorbed in, say, renting a space, or are we talking about building new buildings? I remember before Families Moving Forward became Families Moving Forward, they were the Interfaith Hospitality Network, and churches literally around our country had people sleeping in the churches, and then they'd go to a day house before they got with Genesis House and became Families Moving Forward. Are we looking at situations where we're going to be asking partners to place beds in places? Because, again, to your earlier point about just the physical capacity, when you have larger beds in smaller spaces, how much of this money is going to be eaten up by just trying to find a space to put those folks as opposed to the actual beds?
That's a great question. And
it happens every once in a while.
Right now, the solution hasn't been arrived at. We've been talking about using pallet homes as a temporary shelter structure. Your suggestion of using church space overnights is a possible solution that could just be bringing in mats and creating this. So the thought was, if we had $1 million, we've got partners who do emergency shelter, who do this type of work, and they can bring together the solution and bring together partners with other entities, partnering with, maybe there's a retail space that's got a vacant building that could possibly be used for some. There's so many ways of doing it. We didn't want to say this was the only way it could be. It's sort of, here's the money, here's what we want to see, what creative solutions can come up to meet that need. There's more than one way to meet the needs, and partnerships are critical for anything in the homeless system to succeed.
Absolutely. I think I don't want to be presumptuous, but you probably had most of us at hello in terms of more money for the problem. I just want to make sure that, we're getting maximum bang for our buck, that money is not being consumed by other than bed space, or actually, which can happen.
Mm-hmm.
But we'll look for creative solutions, as you said. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And then the other piece here is a day center and supportive services, which we sort of said no more than $300,000 would go towards that. So yes, $1,300,000 is $1.3 million. Policy and planning didn't arrive at what it would be, but did say there would be no more than $1 million towards emergency shelter and no more than 300,000 going towards a day service center, which would allow people to potentially do laundry, take showers, get mail, meet with supportive services workers to work on things when they're unsheltered. So your emergency shelter could be 900 to $1 million, or 200 and 300 for day center services, and those are to be determined. So that's $2.4 million total request, 1.2 to the city, 1.2 to the county, starting in the July 1 budget cycle. And the Homeless Services Advisory Committee will vote and flush out a final proposal, which will come from the chair of the Homeless Services Advisory Committee to elected officials and city and county management as well, making the formal request. In late December, early January, that letter should be coming, assuming they arrive at an agreement.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. We really appreciate that. It was a great discussion. We'll move to the county side of the county presentation.
Thank you. Just a quick question. How much time is left in the meeting for this presentation? Is it okay to go over
1
a
minute.
little? 1
No,
minute.
I'm just kidding.
Okay.
No, technically that's it, but we'll definitely allow time. We'll allow the time for you to present. I don't want you to feel rushed. It's very important information, as we all see, you know. But it just I'll allow you the time. I don't want you to rush, because it's very, very important information.
All right. Thank you. Well, I will give an abbreviated version because you do have copies of the slides, as well as a summary that we prepared about the county's investments. But I haven't met some of you. My name's Samantha Smith. I'm the Special Projects Coordinator in the Office of the County Manager, and Homelessness Strategy and Response is within my portfolio in that role. I'm really thankful to be able to talk to you all about this today and discuss the county's investments in homeless services, as well as wraparound supports to prevent homelessness. And I just want to note, we've been having a I think, very intersectional conversation about what leads to homelessness and the system that surrounds it. And that's the view that this presentation is also going to take, discussing not just our direct investment in services for those currently experiencing homelessness, but also services that contribute to that overall landscape and try to mitigate some of those systemic failures that Colin was discussing and that many of you here at the table were discussing earlier. So, oh, I forgot I have a remote control, maybe. Okay. I am able to verbally just tell you where this presentation is going. We're going to just take a quick glance at the overview of the homeless system and highlight some of the places that the county's investments intercept that. Colin already gave a great overview, so not spending too much time on that. Then we're going to talk about Durham County's direct investments for services for those currently experiencing homelessness, Durham County investment in support to prevent homelessness, and Durham County support for indirect services to prevent homelessness. Those are zooming out to some of those mental health supports and other ways of defraying costs that would otherwise take money away from being able to cover your housing costs. And then we'll zoom out to Durham County's affordable housing landscape and the investments that the county has made there. I'm happy to continue just discussing while we wait for those slides to pull up. So if you look at your homelessness system slide, that's slide 3, if you're following along with our document, Colin already gave a great summary and overview of the system, and the county does contribute to many areas within that system towards the right side of that page, including diversion assistance, emergency shelter, street outreach, and some of those permanent housing supports. And I wanted to draw your attention to that left side where some of those indirect supports are. The county provides funding for various services that support the costs towards healthcare and medication assistance, also towards costs associated with raising a family, such as childcare. Thank you for pulling that up. So we're looking at those ones on the left side right now. The county also provides and administers energy assistance relief, as well as tax relief, and that is in partnership with the city. We will get into the specifics of that as we move through this presentation. So, direct support that the county provides for those experiencing homelessness include our emergency shelter. I think this might differ just slightly from the packet you have in front of you, but the county owns the building that your Urban Ministries of Durham operates the shelter out of and provides that space to them at a lease of $1 per year. The county also pays for utilities, maintenance, and repair of that building, which for fiscal year 2024 totaled over $84,000. The county also provides operational funding to Urban Ministries, which for the past 2 fiscal years has been over $380,000, and in the previous fiscal year provided one-time funding for a feasibility study for Urban Ministries' proposed expanded shelter. I know we were just talking about our emergency shelter needs. And I also wanted to highlight that there is an $18 million placeholder in the county's capital improvement plan to support unsheltered housing infrastructure. In addition, as Colin mentioned, the county supports street outreach through an interlocal agreement with the city and supports that at over $200,000 per year. Other direct supports the county provides for those currently experiencing homelessness are towards permanent supportive housing, transitional housing, and respite care. The county provides funding to Alliance Health, over $200,000 a year for permanent supportive housing services. Additionally, the county has provided $3 million of funding towards Carver Creek, a future permanent supportive housing site. The city's also partnered on that, and combined, the county and city have invested $6,050,000 into that site. The county also, through the Justice Services Department, operates a transitional housing facility that is for those with criminal legal involvement. And the county has owned that building since 1993, and in addition to a $110,000 contract annually, provides for utilities, maintenance, and repair. Okay, thank you. In addition, in 2025, the county has funded this, but the services will begin in 2025. The county has allocated $2 million of their ARPA funding to expanded unsheltered day services support. That will include additional community outreach and medical support for our neighbors experiencing unsheltered homelessness. Again, that will begin in 2025 and go through 2026. Further, the county provides direct support for homelessness prevention through rental assistance and eviction diversion. Through HOPWA, the county partners with the city to administer $500,000 of funding for that. Those are grant funds. Additionally, the county provides over $68,000 for this fiscal year through the Department of Social Services Opening Doors program, and that helps by providing not down payment, security deposits and first month's rent for those experiencing housing insecurity that have now found permanent housing. And additionally, there's rental assistance through the support the county provides to Alliance Health that was mentioned previously. The county's also provided over $750,000 for eviction diversion. Additionally, we have Maggie Clapp, the director of our Social Services Department, as well as Rashana Parker, the director of our Justice Services Department, some of whose services we mentioned on 1 or 2 slides ago, here to speak to more of that if you have questions. All right. Now I'm going to move on to the indirect supports the county provides that we believe supports homelessness prevention. These are kind of those systemic intercepts we were discussing earlier. We know that it's really hard to maintain stable employment and stable housing if you have a mental health condition that's not being properly treated or managed. And so knowing that the county invests through supportive services with Alliance Health. Additionally, through an $150,000 grant from the North Carolina Department of Adult Corrections to our Justice Services Department, they administer supportive services. The Justice Services Department also, I wanted to highlight this because I believe this is really awesome work, provides employment training and job search assistance, connections to community resources for those transitioning out of jail, housing assistance for those in adult drug treatment court, behavioral health support for those transitioning from detention to the community, and outpatient substance use disorder and mental health treatment. That is funded at about $72,000 annually through combined funding from the Durham County ABC Board, as well as other county sources. Additionally, through 2 grant-funded programs, the Community Paramedics Program has provided mental health as well as medical treatment. One grant from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services for over $343,000 allows peer support specialists to respond alongside community paramedics, and another grant from the North Carolina DHHS allows for community paramedics to run the Medication Assistance Treatment Program. In addition, the county invests in other health services through the Senior Pharmacist Program, as well as pharmacy services through Alliance. We know that there can be high costs associated with medications, and sometimes folks in our, living off the lowest incomes in our community have to make hard choices between affording medications or being connected to resources to provide them medications and providing for other needs. So that is one way that the county invests. Continuing our discussion of these indirect supports, the county also diverts costs associated with energy. They administer nearly $1.9 million from the state for energy assistance payments. The county also diverts costs associated with property taxes through providing $750,000 to the Low-Income Homeowner Tax Relief Program. In partnership with the city, who contributes $500,000, that brings the total funding for that program to about $1.2 million for this fiscal year to help Durham families cover costs associated with their property taxes. Additionally, we know that raising a family is expensive. So another area the county defrays costs are associated with that. The county provides over $698,000 to the Welcome Baby program, which in addition to offering positive parenting classes, also provides free car seats, free pack and plays for safe sleeping, maternity wear and breast pump supplies, as well as children's clothing. In addition, the county administers over $24 million in state child care subsidies, and we know that being able to find and afford child care can greatly impact someone's ability to maintain stable employment. So we view that as another way the county offsets costs that contribute to families' ability to stay stably housed. We also contribute nearly $2.5 million in food assistance support, with $1.9 million of that going towards the Interfaith Food Shuttles Emergency Community Assistance Program, and nearly $500,000 going towards the Double Bucks program. There's a little bit more information on that within the summary I provided. And finally, we know that homelessness does not occur within a vacuum, but as we've discussed here today, exists within a broader housing context. So I wanted to highlight the county's investments in the affordable housing landscape to make stable housing a reality for more individuals and families. There have been over $21 million in public-private partnerships to support the joint parking and housing sites at the 300 and 500 East Main Street sites. Between these two sites, when all units are online, there will be 305 units for families or for households living at or below 80% of the area median income. This section is not mentioned on the slides, but is in the handout, so I wanted to highlight it here. In addition to the 300 and 500 Main Street sites, the city and county have partnered to allocate over $27 million towards 5 separate public-private housing partnerships across Durham, and those will also serve households at or below 80% AMI. Additionally, the county has invested $1.5 million in ARPA dollars, and that went to Durham Community Land Trustees to create and preserve affordable housing through the land trust model. And the county has allocated nearly $1 million, has allocated $1 million towards the Durham Affordable Housing Loan Fund. And I wanted to highlight that as a partnership with the city, as well as self-help, the Duke Office of Community Affairs, and members of the local development community. And the goal is to create or preserve affordable housing units. I know that was a quick presentation because I wanted to be mindful of our time, but thank you for your time and attention in listening to my presentation today.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So this was really excellent information, and as I hope folks in the room, and I don't know if this meeting's being broadcast, but maybe in the minutes can see that the question on homelessness is both held with the city and the county doing various components. I know HSAC is the entity that kind of holds that, right? I guess the space where residents have some influence. And so what kind of, as we see the trends worsening, what kind of broad strategy is happening in the HSAC to both help guide city and county work and also that piece of accountability?
It's a great question. The HSAC, we went to policy and planning and asked policy and planning to set some priorities. The items that are being recommended for funding today, that $2.4 million request, were priority 1 items. There are secondary and tertiary priorities, and they became secondary and tertiary priority because the other thing that needs to happen is a strategic plan needs to be put in place, and we're going to be working on getting an RFP out to bring in a consultant to pull that together before we started getting into the things that are not as exigent as the request today. So we wanted to move the needle. We didn't want to wait until a full strategic plan came out. The other thing that we've done just in terms of coordinating, because as you've seen, like the county does a lot in the homeless space, the city does a lot in the homeless space, and historically we haven't really had necessarily a lot of really intentional conversations. Samantha being at the county and me being at the city, Samantha and I meet every other week and really talk through what are you seeing, what are you doing, and trying to reconcile and figuring out, is the city putting in money in the same place as the county's putting in money? And if we are putting money in the same things, does all that money need to go in, and are we looking for the same outcomes together? How can we be more intentional and be more deliberative and really sort of strengthening that partnership between the city and the county on this system to really kind of leverage dollars from both? That was sort of the impetus of that $1.2 million request. Historically, we've done, all right, 2.4 million, split it half-half, do an interlocal and shifting money back and forth. It was kind of like, well, maybe it's better if we just sort of say, rather than shifting money from one to the other, we put money where folks are kind of already doing some of this, and it would be a smoother process.
Thank you, and I appreciate you kind of tiering the priorities for us as we approach budget season, and that's kind of the focus that HX said, this is critical, and I look forward to seeing, that movement around the strategic plan, because I do think that a strong HSAC that's really, guiding and also, again, offering that piece of accountability is critical for the success of this work. I think many of us are concerned at the trends. I think many of us have participated in point-in-time counts, and we're seeing different kinds of folks than before who are unsheltered. Certainly conversations with families moving forward, the amount of families sleeping in cars, the impact for families and children, specifically long-term impacts of homelessness, I think we're all aware. And so I know that this is one of my top priorities as an elected official. I think many of the folks at this table, it's one of our top priorities. And so I'm glad that we're doing better around our collaboration, and we have to keep improving.
Mm-hmm.
Wendy.
Well, first of all, thank you, Samantha, for your excellent presentation overview. That is, I don't think anyone's ever taken that on before, so appreciate you reaching back, and because there are many, many ways. I would even add to our Veteran Services Department a lot of benefits that they pull in for our veterans. And I do want to also highlight that we have our DSS director here, and we have Travis and Megan from Adult and Aging Services, that we could even include services, more food support, medical support for people staying at home and aging in place that keeps our seniors housed. What I do want to ask Maggie, though, is I think that similar to what Colin has raised about immediate need for some additional money related to diversion, that we are also running out of money in our eviction diversion program. And if you could just, so that everyone hears this, tell us what the need is right now, because I think everyone needs to hear that as well.
We're gonna need you to be on the mic here, so turn this one around.
Because these are also programs that keep people from becoming unhoused.
I'm going to let Megan answer this, but I do believe we have estimated that in the spring we will be out of our eviction diversion. It's about it's a little over 700,000. So I'm going to let Megan talk about that.
So in July, we started with 830,000 for our eviction diversion. And as of this morning, we have, let's see here, 451,847 left. So we're spending on average 85,000 a month. So that's putting us right about April is when we're expecting to be out of the eviction diversion funds. Same with Opening Doors. I think we'll be out. And Opening Doors is a program for people who are unsheltered. They find a place to live, and we're able to help with $750 towards their move-in costs, security deposit, rent. It doesn't go far, but it's a little bit of assistance. And right now we only have $14,783 left. So I was trying to do some fast math. I think we can help with that amount, maybe 20 more people before we're out of those funds.
And then since we're out of the coordinated entry diversion funds, that's going to go even faster right now, because we were told last week that they've depleted those funds for assistance. So.
Okay, well, thank you. I just think it's important to know that probably both of our bodies are going to be asked to allocate funding during this budget year to help fill some of these critical needs. I just wanted to raise that. And I just want to thank everyone who's been a part of this presentation. It's fantastic for all of us to be educated and for the presentations and to talk about this issue going forward. We have to do better at collaborating, coordinating, working together, not just city and county, but also all of the nonprofit partners, the fantastic nonprofit partners, affordable housing partners that we have in the community and the business community. This is an issue that we are going to have to solve together. Public-private partnerships, it is not possible for us to do this on our own. And I want to really lift up, first of all, and also bringing a budget request to us now. Fantastic, that's what we want. So thank you, kudos to HSAC for that. I really hope that with the ask for the county about the 1.2 million, that we're really looking outside the box at what is the best way to do that, because in the conversations that I sit in with folks who are just as involved, with people who have severe mental illness and substance use disorder, adding more shelter space is not going to be what people need. And so what we know is missing, I hear it over and over again from all different partners, is we need this type of pallet home, you know, non-congregant, inexpensive, something we can get set up quick. We don't have it in Durham. Other communities have it. Greensboro has it. Other cities and counties across the country. This is a type of housing that is severely missing and lacking. So I hope that we will really look at that and how we can stand that up. I've also seen requests about safe parking for families. I think we need to think about what are things that we can do quickly, even now, that can't wait. And then also around the shelter, you know, I'm not one for keeping my mouth shut, so I'll just say it. You know, we have a potential great site with the Durham County's purchase of the Boys and Girls Club. How do we look at that space with the city and the county working together on that being a day center and surrounding that with some type of pallet homes or something? That's a 2.5 acre site. So again, that's something else we don't have in Durham is the day shelter for supportive services. So I'm just going to throw it out there. I know we'll need a lot of people and their expertise on this, but I'm hopeful that we can work together. And it's going to take us working together because unfortunately the signs are already here, and this is before the current administration. At our last DSS meeting, and I said this at our board meeting last night, I've never seen such a long waiting list for food for for adults. Over 500 adults in our community are waiting, would like to be getting services for Meals on Wheels. That is scary. That is alarming. And then, and you can maybe correct me on the number, I haven't seen such a high waiting list for child care subsidy. Was it 265?
I think so, last count, yes.
Children who are waiting for child care. That means parents who won't be able to go out and work if they don't have child care for their children. So think about what you were talking about, Samantha. What are the root causes, Colin? So we really have to stay on top of these issues as a community. And again, we're going to need the larger community, the private sector, the business community to help us with these needs.
Thank you. I just want to clarify. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm going to come to you in just a second. Manager Hager.
No, I just had a quick comment. On the slides Samantha shared, there's an $18 million placeholder that the board put into our capital improvement plan for to support the unsheltered. And our hope is that the city will partner, as we have had conversations in the past at some level. And as Commissioner Jacob mentioned, there are conversations about options and how we move forward. But we do need some coordinated conversation. I'm excited about the strategic plan, and that will help guide us so that we are looking from a long-term infrastructure perspective as well as ongoing operating. I know with all of these investments, we want to make sure we're placing them in the right area as we face some fiscal challenges. And so just excited about the discussion, and I know we will partner to do what's best for the community.
Councilwoman Caballero.
Thank you. I just had a quick question. When you say eviction diversion from the county, is that just rent assistance? I just want to make sure that.
Yes.
Okay. I just want to, because the city funds eviction diversion through legal aid through attorneys, and so just to put it out into the public, this is around rent assistance. I look forward to continuing conversations. We didn't get to a lot of solutions today. We got to a lot of what we're currently facing, and so I know that there's a proposal, Commissioner Jacobs mentioned it, around some kind of short-term solutions, pallet villages, things that we're seeing in other communities. You're also seeing places like Austin who are able to build quickly. Asheville just did it post-Helene, these tiny village type places. And so I guess my charge is for staff, both on the city and the county side. I don't think that this is a topic that's going to go away. Like we know that. I would love to see, we didn't get to solutions today, and we need some, what are some quick things that are working in other parts of the country specifically, so it's not like, okay, a day shelter, great, but we know that that's a longer term investment. What's something that we can get in the next 3 to 6 months, because that is what the community is expecting from us. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't have a solution at the moment, but I just do want to put this out there. I'm concerned that with eviction diversion, we are just kicking the bucket down the road. And I don't know if that is the best use of the funds. We have been getting requests in for $8,000. Now, we only give $2,000. They have to come up with the rest. I don't believe that's sustainable. If they're in that position at that time, what are we doing? Are we seeing them being evicted in 4 or 5 months? I've asked Megan to get with legal aid. If they're being evicted 4 to 5 months down the road, we don't see that because it's a one-time request at DSS. So maybe there's a way we can share data. My concern is we have to be proactive on the front end. We have to get to those families before they're in debt to a landlord at $8,000, because to climb out of that is almost, to me, that would be unattainable and not sustainable. So I just want to put that out there, that we really focus, in my opinion, on the front end.
And can I make one quick contextual point and not stop? Pre-COVID, we budgeted less than $300,000 a year for rental assistance. Then we had the infusion of infrastructure dollars that allocated about $25 million. And so now the $700,000 is a higher number, but there's just a huge gap. And so as we face these challenges, trying to figure out what we can sustain, as Mackie mentioned, is a tough challenge.
I just want to say that's where that landlord engagement piece becomes so critical, because at the end of the day, that's where the breakdown is. What is happening? Encouraging landlords not to sell. That was a huge, I know, within the Latino community and broadly the immigrant community during COVID. That's why we're seeing so many Latino families living in their cars, which we did not see pre-pandemic. We know that, and it's because people, to the point, they lived in a house for 20 years, their rent had been real stable, and that person sold or flipped or whatever, and so that landlord engagement does become another critical part that was mentioned in this kind of ecosystem.
Okay. Thank you all. Go ahead.
I was just going to share, our homeless data does not show eviction equals homelessness. A very, very small number of people that end up in our homeless system data end up there as their previous residence was owned or rented by a person. It's less than 5% over the last 3 or 4 years that I went back and looked at. It's a very, very small number of people. Most people who face eviction self-resolve after an eviction. They may be doubled up in a Department of Education homeless thing, but eviction does not end up as a one-to-one match to unsheltered homelessness. It's a very small percent, and the only piece on evictions that is a slight indicator of likely of ending up literally homeless is a history of being homeless prior to housing. That group who has had a history of homelessness is slightly more likely to end up homelessness again. Just wanted to share that little piece of data.
Councilwoman Titiana Freeman.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to catch this last presentation, and I want to thank you all as well. I think there's been a lot of work over the years in trying to figure out what the solutions could look like, and we're getting somewhere now. I appreciate the John Avery Boys and Girls Club comment, but I want to make sure to also offer that Urban Ministries in partnership with St. Philip's has also offered some type of land swap with the county so that any day service that could also include school facilities for like Durham Tech, North Carolina Central, just providing something that is actually downtown for day services in our community for people who are unhoused, along with the laundry, the showers and mail option. And I do think that that is worth having a long conversation about what it could look like, because those facilities, there is a public-private partnership developing that could be used. And I do want to just also say that it's been increasingly layered And the way that we're trying to approach this, I really, I appreciate Councilmember Caballero pointing out that the eviction diversion for the county is more rental assistance, which has no, like, there's no way to implement a plan that says that a landlord can't raise the rent. So it's not just they're selling, they're actually increasing rents 100, 200%, and it's just not sustainable for any family in our community, not just Hispanic. All of them are experiencing this across the entire city and the county. And so I do want to make sure we're looking at ways to have not just that accountability on the sales side, but also on the rental side. And if there is a partnership that could be further developed with the Durham Community Land Trustees, Housing for New Hope, and others, that is where we actually can gain a foothold. It would be, yeah. There's a lot more that could happen, and we should be in more conversation. So I look forward to that. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. I don't see any other comments.
Really quick, Mr. Chair, on eviction diversion. I did hear a couple of solutions today. More money, which is not surprising. It seemed like we had this talk. It was us. Yes. Not too long ago. I can't remember whether it was this fiscal year or was it?
It was last fiscal year.
Yes. Which has there been a year when we haven't been in this situation with eviction diversion? Because it seems like it's a recurring motif.
Well, as Claudia said, for the last few years, there is an influx of millions of dollars. So I know since we have gotten out of that, yes, last year and then this year. I can't speak to before I was not here.
Before it was, eviction diversion budget was $180,000. And I am not aware of us either running out or requesting more. I really think that when, like Maggie said, when all of the COVID money came in, I don't know if the word of eviction diversion got out and people now know to come to us for assistance rather than before they might not have, but our numbers were just much lower before.
Yeah, it seemed like the challenge grew with our capacity to address it. And I got some, you actually raised the point that I got some unkind emails about for simply asking the question. And that is when we've helped folk, what happened 4 or 5 months later? Were we stabilizing people for a couple of months and then they still, and when I asked about that kind of reporting and tracking, there was some pushback that, this is some kind of, sacrosanct thing you can't question. My concern is not to stabilize people for a couple of months, taking the victory lap that we saved this person and they're actually still evicted. There's no joy in that. There's no victory in that. So I think it's important that as we consider putting more money into it, this is Durham. Of course, we want to do those kind of things. That's not the question. The question is what's actually happening when we do it, and that would be helpful to me as a decision maker to kind of know what's actually happening to those folk after we've stabilized them for $2,000, pumping more money at the front end, but those folk actually, what is their fate? And I think the taxpayers, we owe that to tell folk, be fully transparent on what's happening. With that said, if we need more money, what is a solution I heard to help folk? I think we're certainly willing to do that, but we need the accountability as well. So, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank y'all.
Okay. Without hearing any more comments here, I'll accept. Just a reminder, our next meeting is February 11th, 2025. We voted to include the school board in that meeting, so it'll be all three bodies. I'll accept the motion to adjourn.
So moved.
It's been moved and properly seconded that we adjourn. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed, please use the same sign. Passed unanimously. We are adjourned.